will be one of the most challenging enumerations that the Census Bureau would have to undertake in 2020 for a number of reasons and situations that you've already covered. The COVID-19 pandemic simply has made that challenge much more difficult for the Census Bureau. Adding to that, political interference by the administration has also further complicated the work of the Census Bureau career professionals. So what I'd like to do is to cover a little bit about what some developments from this week, and then some other issues that I think are important for you all to follow and things to look for as the Census Bureau undertakes the non-response follow-up operation in a couple of weeks. First, the policy memo that the Trump administration, or the president himself, released on Tuesday. One thing to make clear is that the president is not asking for undocumented immigrants not to be counted in the census. And we're very concerned there has been coverage and a great deal of media suggesting that immigrants are not to be counted. That is not what the policy memo is asking for. The policy memo is asking for the Secretary of Commerce, after the census is itself completed, to somehow remove from the count of every state a certain number of persons believed to be undocumented immigrants. And the only way to do that would be to use some sort of estimates or sampling of populations in order to determine how many persons in each state is an undocumented immigrant. This is extremely imprecise. And as we said in our statement that we released on Tuesday, this amounts to nothing more than cooking the numbers, of making up an entire new data set on which to base the most important element of our democracy, and that's the reapportionment of representation in the House of Representatives. What I believe is also an assault on the American sensibility is that the president pretends to be able to amend the Constitution by memo. Nothing could be more offensive. This is, in fact, the president asking for immigrants to be excluded from the actual count. And we already know that we are lagging in response rates in heavy Latino areas around the country. On June 17th, we conducted a town hall where we released data that was a deep dive into the response rates that the Census Bureau releases on a daily basis. And while the Census Bureau crows about reaching its goal of 60.1% of response rates sometime in June, remember that goal was supposed to have been reached on April 31st. And even if now we're close to 63% of households having self-responded, that still means 37% of America's households have yet to respond to the census. And the only way they will be counted is if they answer the knock on the door through non-response follow-up. That's an operation that's supposed to begin on August 11th. There are a couple things we need to look for to see how successful this will be. One is, to the extent that the Census Bureau will be able to deploy a satisfactory workforce that is both in numbers and in cultural competence to be able to go into the diverse neighborhoods where the response rates are the lowest, to be able to knock on doors, and to do so in a way that is safe, given local public health protocols that are requiring, of course, social distancing, use of personal protective equipment, and the like. We know that the Census Bureau has purchased millions of pieces of personal protective equipment for their enumerators to use. But we also know that they're experiencing some challenges in the enumerators actually feeling fully comfortable in going door to door and trying to get responses from these households that have yet to fill out their forms. This will be especially challenging, not just in single family dwellings, but when enumerators have to go into, say, apartment buildings, where that kind of social distancing is simply practically impossible. And to the extent that enumerators will be able to get the information that's needed to complete the count. So first, in terms of how will the Department of Commerce arrive at a number of undocumented immigrants, It would simply be by making estimates. Not only is there no question on the decennial census on citizenship, there is also no question on immigration status. There is no way to determine the exact number of individuals who are undocumented, and even to determine what constitutes undocumented status in itself often requires a expert lawyer to understand the different definitions of status in this country. Would this include, for example, a DACA recipient? Would it include somebody who's seeking asylum and has not yet received residency in this country? Who determines who's undocumented and not? And these data would somehow need to be applied to each state. Now, will it result in gerrymandering? What it will result in is a malapportionment of the House of Representatives. And it will be done in complete violation of the Constitution. The language of the Constitution says to apportion the House of Representatives based on the whole number of persons. And that whole number has to come from the census. And now the administration wants to play with the numbers after the census to come up with a new figure on which to reapportion the House.